Hi there, Simeon Burke here from the Saculum. Today I had the great pleasure of welcoming our first guest to politics at the Crossroads, Giles Fraser. Giles will be well known to many of you as a journalist. He writes currently for Unheard and previously with The Guardian. Giles is a priest and canon in the Church of England, and he regularly contributes to Radio 4's Thought for the Day and The Moral Maze. And he has a new book coming out in a couple of months called Chosen, Lost and Found Between Christianity and Judaism, published by Allen Lane Press. And I, for one, can't wait to get my hands on a copy. On a personal level, Giles has had a tremendous influence on me in terms of how I think about the individual and the community, or the I and the we, about the relationship between the universal and the particular, and so much more. Today, Giles generously offered to bat for or represent the post-liberals. Now, post-liberals are those who move to the left on the economy, to the right on culture, and who look to the local and the particular in terms of governance. We had, I think, an absolutely fascinating discussion about how he sees the relationship between socialism and conservatism, about whether the pandemic is a post-liberal moment, and how the church roots us in community, warts and all. But above all, what came across is that Giles sees himself first and foremost as a Christian. He ended our conversation with these wonderful words, which I think beautifully challenge each of us about where our priorities lie. I hope that you enjoy watching. Giles, just one final question. Why do you think Christians should take post-liberalism seriously? Why should Christians be talking about post-liberalism?
Well, listen, I mean, I don't really want them to, actually. I want them to talk about Christianity. That's not my focus, actually. I mean, I think probably post-liberals should talk about Christianity, but I think Christians have within our scriptures and tradition easily enough resources to deal with the political issues that face us. So they don't need to focus on something like post-liberalism. I don't really care about post-liberalism, really. I mean, that's probably what describes me, but, you know, I'm a fairly orthodox Catholic Christian, and that's what I'm really interested in. I'm interested in, you know, if you want to know what post-liberalism means to me, it's what I do there with bread and wine, you know, and the way in which that brings us together as community. Now, that sort of table fellowship, that sense of who we are, that's my post. Morning, Simeon. How are you, mate? And,
yeah, I'm keeping well. Yeah, yourself?
Good.
I wish.
No, I don't.
I wish that we were
all right
over a pint or a nice glass of wine or something, but yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
No.
I'm doing dry January as well, which is another added burden. So let's get started.
Great, let's get started. Yeah, so the first kind of big beefy question I have for you is just looking at where you sit politically and theologically or ecclesially. I think I'm right in saying that politically you're post-liberal, so broadly moving left, economically, right culturally, political, sort of in terms of governance, looking to the local and the particular. And then ecclesially, I think I'm right in saying that you would belong to the Anglo-Catholic tradition, so looking to the Catholic heritage. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about how you came to these sort of positions, paint a bit of a picture or a story for our listeners as to how you came.
Yeah, it's a long thing. Well, you asked the question in the right way, actually, because I think it's probably quite hard to describe, or it doesn't really help you to describe where you are without describing how you came to be where you are. So you're sort of situated in a sort of history of thinking about things. I would say about myself, even though I have been, I guess, overtly political on a number of issues, that politics is not the sort of primary paradigm with which I sort of see the world, I would see that my interest as being first and foremost theological, and that my political commitments grow out of that. I came to faith on the back of a period of being in the hard left, and for a while, and in a way still today, my political perspective is shaped by some of the sorts of things that I learned as a Marxist, to the extent that, I mean, I suppose what I'd say about that now is that many of the questions and the issues are ones that I still ponder, even though I don't have the same answers. So things like I've always been very struck by the sort of Marxist challenge about what Frankfurt School people call reification, which is turning people, living human beings, into things through the market and the sort of the forces of production. And I still have that, and that isn't actually a Marxist anxiety. It's an anxiety that comes out of particularly the Hebrew scriptures, where so much of the anxiety there is about turning God into a thing, idolatry. And I'm aware that, that turning God into something like the golden calf, into a thing that you can sort of set and worship, and that has that sort of objective presence, is a way of destroying something about the nature of the divine. And I also think that's true about human beings as well, is about setting them firmly in some, I guess a matrix of capitalism is potentially dehumanizing. So to that extent, I can sound quite hard left in all sorts of ways, and I retain a commitment to redistribution, and as you say, economically, I think I would still cast myself on the left. But I'm not a liberal, which is that I don't see the individual and individual realization as the most important perspective through which to look at things politically and theologically. The former chief rabbi, may he rest in peace, Jonathan Sacks, just wrote last year, came out with a really brilliant book about the importance of the we taking priority over the I. And I suppose that sense of community, rootedness in time and in space is really important to me, and the way in which we are our individuality grows out of community, rather than community is the sort of cumulative addition of all our individualities. And that's so I'm not a liberal, and I've probably never really been a liberal, which is ironic, because in theological terms I think people still think that I'm something of a liberal, but I've never really been a liberal. Socialist and increasingly conservative about things like community. I'm impressed with, more and more impressed with people like your namesake, and that sort of tradition of political thought which prizes community and a sense of our small local commitments. And I suppose Brexit was the absolute put a sort of a bonfire under a whole load of views that I had before. It put my sort of communitarianism and my social into conflict with each other. And so I suppose that my post-liberal mood grows out of that. But I ought also to say that I'm absolutely not, and I never really have been, either in personality or in thinking, a systematic thinker. So I don't have a systematic theology of politics. and I feel entirely comfortable with views that seem to contradict each other. They're always thoughts on the way to a deeper perspective. So my contradictions are always challenging me to think further about things, but they're there. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So that's a little picture of where I would find myself now.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you. I thought it was very interesting that you framed it in terms of having theological commitments first and then coming to sort of your political convictions afterwards. I just wonder, and I suspect I might know what you'll have to say on this, but have there ever been occasions where your theological commitments, your faith, has challenged your political convictions in serious ways that have caused you to think, oh, actually, about this political issue, I was dead wrong?
Well, yes, I think one of the things that I value most about church community is the family nature of the church community gathered around the Eucharist and its full diversity. And the problem it seems to me with a sort of liberal articulation of diversity is it doesn't really it finds it very difficult to it finds it very difficult to affirm a full diversity of perspectives on the world, and particularly a sort of a commitment to place. So the commitment to place, it seems to me, is absolutely vital. That the sort of that theologically speaking, we pray from somewhere, from out of some community, that we are linked, yes, to. You know, we've had this all the time during lockdown, people saying, your God is everywhere, why do you need to pray in a particular building or something like that?
I was one of those, Giles, at one point.
What?
I'm afraid I was one of those at one point.
Okay, there we are. So there we are. Now, no, it's a very good question. So the thing is, that there is this tension between the universalism, which is God's universal love for all humanity and God's presence amongst us, and the way in which we are situated specifically in our relationship to God. And you can't entirely discount either God's universality or our particularity, our embodied specific nature living in time and space. And so it's a relationship between those two sorts of things, which of course the incarnation is supremely a relationship between those sorts of things. And there are those who are sort of universalistically minded who complain that there is a scandal of particularity, is the phrase, isn't it, about the incarnation. Well, there is a scandal of particularity also about our prayerfulness, it seems to me. And that scandal of particularity is that we pray out of specific places in specific contexts. And that the problem with God is everywhere, so you can worship everywhere, is it does justice to the God bit, but it doesn't do full justice to the praying person who is located in time and space. And that's the relationship, that's the tension that you get with the incarnation. That's the tension that, I suppose the whole of Nicaea was wrestling with, that how do you bring together the specific, the human, and the divine, the universal? And it seems to me you have to hold on to both of those. That's the Nicene. Nicaea wasn't an answer, but it was what an answer has to look like in order to be an answer, and it has to have both poles fully coming together.
Yeah, and this issue is really playing out just now, isn't it, with the fact that we, many communities are choosing not to meet, others are, and there's a sense of this issue has really come into the limelight again of the embodied nature of us as human beings, as worshippers, and of community. And I think it's there's something of a sort of almost a sort of worldview clash that I can see between different parts of the church on this, and it's
well, I mean, Zoom, for instance, is very good at doing, or not bad anyway, at doing ministry of the word. You know, so there's a sort of inherent Protestantism to Zoom, which is, you know, it's very good at proclaiming the word.
Although on that, I mean, the Reformed tradition is, which I would broadly place myself in, it's about word and sacrament.
Yes. I mean, I'm about to come on to that. I mean, that's so you need both.
Yeah.
But it's terrible at doing the sacramental stuff. You know, I mean, obviously I can't give you the Eucharist in the situation that we are now in. So even for those of a Reformed disposition, like yourself, it is unsatisfactory given the fact that it doesn't do word and sacrament. Now, I'm much more sacramental, being Anglo-Catholic, and for me, it's sort of devastatingly unsatisfactory to do everything on Zoom, which is why it's particularly important for me to remain open and to be the place where people receive the Eucharist. That seems to me to be absolutely vital to my.
That's exactly the clash I'm getting at. I mean, I'm broadly with you on this. Actually, I've had a bit of a Damascus Road conversion on it. I can say conversion because I'm a Gentile. In my case, it's been a sense that, and also I think, I mean, the embodiedness matters for the preaching of the word as well.
Yes, of course, that's right.
I mean, preaching is much more than a performance, but it's in a sense not less than that. So when you're there in person, you can pick up on, you know, the preacher lowering his or her voice, or making certain gestures. You know, being there for preaching for the word is also makes a big difference, I think.
That's completely true. That's completely true. So that's my I think this issue is not just a sort of, this issue about whether churches stay open in a time of pandemic is not just a sort of practical issue of public health, though it is of course that too. And churches have to be quite rightly concerned about that. It is also a really quite difficult theological issue that takes us right back to some of the issues of the early church with regard to how the universal and the particular relate to each other.
Yeah, I think you put that really beautifully. I saw interestingly yesterday that there was some talk about cathedrals that were open as centres for vaccination, but and I saw you tweeted about this. There was no sense that they could do that, which is a really important witness, but not be open.
Well,
preaching the word in the sacrament. I found that really bizarre.
The Archbishop of Canterbury actually brought that tweet up this morning on the Today programme. So he was interviewed by Justin Webb, and Justin Webb said that I'd said something of that regard, and the Archbishop said that I didn't understand the circumstances of cathedrals like Canterbury. Well, he may be right, but anyway, it seems to me, deal with the fullness of the theological problems that we're having, and you know, it doesn't seem to be entirely satisfactory. I mean, it certainly wasn't satisfactory to say that, okay, you can have mass from your kitchen and proclaim it over Zoom. I think that was a profound mistake, because of this. I mean, why do people have such a strong commitment to place and to each other? Now, this commitment, and this is not something that we need to sort of do away with. I mean, I've written before, and this is only half right, that Christianity in its early form, and perhaps throughout its life, has always had a tension between, to use David Goodhart's language, the somewheres and the anywheres. I mean, in a way, St. Paul was a classic anywhere, you know, citizen of the Roman Empire, comfortable with moving around the world. And Jesus looks much more like a somewhere to me, you know, very specifically rooted in place, associated with Galilee, um, and even early on, you know, associated not particularly with the mission to the Gentiles, but with anyway. I mean, whatever that tension exists. That tension certainly exists in the New Testament.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it seems to me that idea about place versus no place is a profound tension. But it seems to me that anyway, this lockdown situation has highlighted this fascinating and long-standing tension that exists within the Christian tradition between, I suppose you might want to say, its Jewish heritage, which is much more concerned with the specifics of place and people, and the universal proclamation that comes about through St. Paul. And I found myself sliding. I suppose my wife is Israeli. We speak Hebrew at home. Me badly, but I sort of get it. And I found myself thinking of myself much more as a Jewish Christian the longer I go on, which I think, which actually seems to push me away from the sort of Pauline stuff a bit. You know, all of this is.
Paul remained a Jew, didn't he?
He did.
Paul was really the calling of Paul as a Jew coming to see the Messiah as Jesus.
Yes, that's right.
Heuristically, it's useful to think of them perhaps as somewhere as anywhere. Like that. I think that's useful.
And not only that, but I mean, you know, the universalism is not just a New Testament idea, but there's strong universalism in, say, the book of Isaiah.
Right, too.
You know, there's, you know, so I mean, but what I suppose what I have come to see, and this is probably much more of a theological point than a political one, though I'm sure politics grows out of it, is that the longer I think about all of this, the less I see that there's. I mean, the more I see that there's not much new in the New Testament. I mean, you know, even the messianic proclamation, which is in a sense, obviously, what's that Christians believe that's been realized, that is obviously the regarded as the sort of realization of clearly a very Jewish aspiration.
Absolutely. The gospel has got so much to say on that. The beginning of Mark's gospel is sort of the beginning of the good news, and then it's sort of a quote from Isaiah that the good news is old news in a sense.
Oh yes, the good news is old news. That's right. And Isaiah is Isaiah is the most quoted, I think the most quoted Hebrew prophet in the New Testament. And so I see the New Testament. I mean, I don't like words Old Testament and New Testament. I don't like these at all. And I don't think there's all that much new in the New Testament. Jesus grows out of that very specifically Jewish prophetic tradition, and that's certainly the lens through which I understand him more and more.
It's fantastic, Giles. Something I really wanted to ask you. This is switching tack slightly to more of the political side. Is on this relationship between conservatism and socialism. It's something I've heard you talk about with a number of different people. But you know, I think your old Twitter handle had something like a communist of the old school and a Tory of the old school. This John Ruskin quote. Yes, and I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear you talk about how you see these sitting together. You know, are they in tension with one another? Because when I think of conservatism, particularly Burkean conservatism, there's an emphasis on, you know, gradual change. Socialism might have more to do with sort of a revolution, social revolution. Economically, there's something interesting to say there as well. I mean, conservatism has kind of been co-opted by libertarianism, I would say, economically.
That's completely right. That's where things went wrong, I think.
Together, or do they?
Yeah. So when I grew up, intellectually, I suppose, during the sort of Thatcher period, where what I understood to be conservatism was actually a form of sort of an early version of libertarianism, I guess. You know, it was all about the free market, and
basically liberalism, isn't it? Sort of
and
negative.
it's basically a form of liberalism. It's basically a form of,
although freedom is conceived of as negative freedom, isn't it?
yeah. So that's all. That's absolutely right. But that's what I thought conservatism was. Now, there's an irony in that because the market is the greatest change agent the world has ever known. So it doesn't conserve very much. And obviously, Mrs. Thatcher, for instance, was an absolute revolutionary. And she didn't conserve very much either. So it's only when you start reading people like, I don't know, Roger Scruton, for instance, and you start looking at people like Scruton, and you start to go, this is actually much more complicated. Thatcher really wasn't a conservative. She wasn't trying to, you know, what's the essence of that sort of conservative? You're right. It's to say that things are more easily broken than they are created, and that even if things are not good at working in theory, they can sometimes get along in practice, and be careful not to break them or destroy them because of some abstract idea of what you think is right. And there's an idea about how things muddle along. And they can muddle along for the good. And you don't necessarily need some great philosophical theory imposed upon the world that is going to change the world for the better, because those things often don't work. And that's, of course, Burke's criticism of the French Revolution, and that would be mine as well, and my fear of revolution. Now, my commitment to socialism is simply a commitment to the redistribution of wealth and the you know, a commitment to the alleviation of suffering and poverty. So that seems to me to absolutely right and terribly important. And I don't think revolutionaries are always very good at doing that. I think often the poor are those who suffer through revolutions. So yes, I'd like to have the state. I would definitely like the state to redistribute wealth more than it does now. I would definitely like there to be higher taxes for the rich. I have no problem with that at all. But I do have a problem with the sort of libertarian idea of individual self-assertion, and the way in which that the left has been taken over by that as well. So, you know, the left, the sort of conservative socialists, you know, I put that obviously deliberately in a provocative, contradictory way, as Ruskin himself did. But there's that tradition from William Morris to Ruskin to George Orwell, I suppose, and you know, I suppose also early Christian socialists, R.H. Tawney, a number of those that would have important things to say about community and place. I think identity politics has been disastrous. I mean, for the left, I think probably because the left ended up being strongly affected, the Labour Party in particular was strongly affected by Mrs. Thatcher. So, you know, Mrs. Thatcher was asked, you know, what was her greatest influence, and she said Tony Blair, and I sort of get that, and I think because the left in a way gave up on redistribution, they had to find some other way of articulating their radicalism, and they articulated their radicalism not in terms of the redistribution of wealth, but in terms of identity politics, and not class, but other forms of diversity politics, and that became a sort of grievance culture, which I don't have much sympathy with, really.
That's interesting. I think I mean, kind of, I suppose the sort of left-wing economics and the right-wing cultural conservatism. You know, the importance of place, the importance of nation, the local
Home,
home, community, family. I mean, I suppose I'm very on board with the cultural conservatism, to be quite honest. the left-wing economics, I'm wondering what that, you painted a bit of a picture there, but what it actually means, I'm less clear on. And I imagine some of those who are attracted to post-liberalism are also slightly nervous about, what does it actually mean to move slightly left on the economy, as Matthew Goodwin's always talking about?
Well, yes, he is. I mean, well, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, I think it's. I think it's.
Work,
I mean, I think in a sense, it's just a commitment to higher public spending and higher taxes, and that public spending being focused on the alleviation of poverty. Now, there's lots of ways in which that won't work, but listen. At this point, I slightly put my hands up and go, Simeon, I'm not a politician. I'm certainly not an economist.
Yeah.
So, I'm not, this is not where you can try and draw me and you can get my cod theories about the world, but they're not really what drives me on this.
Sure.
But, I'm here in my parish here in the Elephant and Castle. This is a parish that is where lots of people, especially over the last year or so, have been, first of all, they've been thrown back on food banks because of universal credit, and then what's happened with this lockdown, and they need more help. They need much more help. And the people here who, community is destroyed by poverty as well as by liberal individualism. And that seems to me to be a right and proper thing for a priest to be concerned with.
I wonder if I could sort of move more closely and sort of narrow in on post-liberalism and Christianity.
Yeah.
And my question here is sort of twofold, and it's what do you see in Christianity that is post-liberal? We've talked a little bit about this. And what do you see in post-liberalism that is perhaps distinctively Christian?
So we have talked a little bit about this, but it seems to me that let's say the tradition that I am in, Christianity in this country, some of its glories have been within the parish system, and the parish system is a way in which place comes together with the experience of the divine, and that commitment to place, it seems to me to be terribly important, going back, many hundreds of years, and so I really like that's something ecclesiologically which is really important to me. But it's more than just ecclesiology. It's a sort of the parish system is a way of expressing a certain sort of loyalty and solidarity for people with each other. Now, the citizen of the world, liberalism, the problem with it is it can be an alibi not to demonstrate your solidarity with your fellow human beings, especially those who are poor. It can be a way of thinking of them as fly of a country. It's just a place you go through or you pass by. So I think it's parish is my ecclesiological starting point. I have a strong commitment to that. That goes in this country all the way back to, what would it be, Theodore of Tarsus or whatever, however long it goes back. But it's sort of deep rooted in the sort of mindset of English Christianity, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've mentioned that you're not a sort of a systematic thinker when it comes to politics, but that's something that I see as that within your sort of political and cultural and theological convictions are really mutually reinforcing one another. The sense of the importance of place. You've got a theological underpinning for that in terms of the Hebrew Scriptures, the New Testament, and then that's as you say, kind of plays out in the way that you see the church, the way you want it to be structured, and the sort of parish system.
Which is why I suppose I am particularly aggrieved and worried about the threats that currently exist to the parish system, which the parish system, there is no doubt the parish system is under threat, is that that's not necessarily just the church's fault through secularization. Secularization creates great financial pressures on the church. But the church, I worry that the church is beginning to retreat from its understanding of the parish as being the sort of central place of engagement between the church and people. So the sort of creation more and more of these sort of parish jobs, these sector ministry jobs, jobs that are, recently the Diocese of Manchester has advertised for 7 new area deans. So these are sort of like, this is where I think many in the church feel they're going to retreat to much less of a parish-based system, more of a broader oversight, and that worries me. That definitely worries me. So I think we should have, less bishops, less archdeacons, less administration from church house, less, much greater subsidiarity. We've had far too much centralization, and this may well be things like the Board of Finance, the way in which the financial control is taken from parishes and given to the Board of Finance. All of them for very good reasons at the time, but what it's created is a much more centralized bureaucratic church structure. And it seems that in times of stress, the church is prone now to rally around those central structures rather than rally around the parish. That really bothers me, because it seems to me to be the glory of the Church of England is its parish structure. And that definitely fits in with my theology and politics.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way where we see those come across. One thing that's really interesting to me as well is the way that Catholic and Anglo-Catholic voices seem to really be prominent in the post-liberal movement. I mean, I think of yourself, Philip Blond, Patrick Deneen, Adrian Vermeulen, and others. And I mean, I suppose before I ask the question, I think the Reformed tradition as well has something to say to this. I'd like to see sort of an ecumenical, maybe a bad word, a sort of cross-denominational or interdenominational conversation there, because the Reformed tradition also has a lot to say on covenants, the importance of covenants.
Yes.
I mean, Jonathan Sachs's book on morality, I thought he dealt so beautifully with Calvin's notion of covenants, and I just wish that Christians could often pay the same attention to the Jewish tradition. But I suppose
You're completely right about that stuff about Calvin, and it was a bit of an eye-opener to me actually when I read that. Right. And I have grown much less wary of Calvin as I get older. But his stuff on Calvin, and compared to Luther, it was very good. It was very good, and you're quite right about that sort of covenantal thing that can exist within the Reformed tradition. So, listen, I think the post-liberal, first of all, post-liberalism is a really bad description. So to call yourself something that's post something is like, that sort of feels terrible to me. And it may well be that we're pre-liberal as well. And it may well be, that there are some traditions of liberalism, just to be clear on this, there are some traditions of liberalism that I don't really have a problem with, and some commitments to subsidiarity. So I did an interview with Larry Sedenhop a while ago, and the way he talks about liberalism, I don't have any problem with that really at all. I suppose I have for me the problem is when it's just about individual self-assertion, individual flourishing, and that the Reformed tradition certainly is a part of the story of how we get to our sort of prioritization of the I over the we. You know,
I disagree with that. I disagree.
I mean, you know, if you, I mean, something like, I suppose.
I think it's the Enlightenment, Giles, that's the problem. That the Enlightenment is where we see the glorification of the individual. I think certain strands within Reformation thought might have been taken up, but I don't think it was at all inevitable.
Well, I mean, you may be right on this, and I mean, I suppose that where do I get my prejudice here from? I mean, I think something like Charles Taylor's Sources of the Self, which is Charles Taylor's a Roman Catholic, and that would be, you know, I'd be more sympathetic to that. And you know, Taylor's a bit harsh on the Reformed tradition, perhaps. So yeah, I can see how. And don't get me wrong, I'm no fan of the Enlightenment. I mean, I just like the Enlightenment is no, but and I can also see
there is a tendency to sort of these post-reformational churches that are perhaps Calvinist.
Yeah.
You know, so it's sort of a distinction I would draw there between the intentions of the sort of original reformers and then what was taken up later. That would be my view anyway. Well,
that's very interesting stuff, and as you rightly say, you know, to look at something like Calvin through the lens of someone like Jonathan Sacks was an eye opener for me, an absolute eye opener for me. So, look, there's a lot to be said. This conversation, there's a lot to be said in this area that I find very fascinating. But it is probably the case that the most prominent people who would identify as post-liberals are probably around the broadly Catholic tradition. You know, so people like Patrick Deneen and so on, and Philip Blond, and John Milbank. Well, I mean, Milbank's a more perhaps more complicated thinker than certainly than I am. You know, there's a much richer and complex engagement with the questions that we're asking here. And certainly that, I mean, I love John, but he and I would disagree passionately about things like the European Union and the way in which these questions that we're asking here would play into Brexit debate and that sort of thing. And that's, the Brexit debate has exposed some really interesting theological divisions. Yeah. But nonetheless, yeah, I think we're broadly right to say that it's a sort of, it is, to the extent that post-liberalism has a theological arm, it is probably Catholic, though it's also the case that there is a, as it were, spirituality of post-liberalism, which probably comes from, you know, probably best expressed in terms of, oh god, my brain's gone blank. Who's the that brilliant environmentalist farmer from sorry?
Ginger Banks or Wendell Berry?
Wendell Berry. Yeah, so if we're talking about a sort of spirituality of post-liberalism that's vaguely Christian, but it's not absolutely, it's not front and center. Someone like Wendell Berry is an obvious example, and
right.
Sorry?
He's a Christian as well, I think.
Yes, he is. Yes. But that's not, you know, he's written about that, but that's not, you know, that's not the reason you go to Wendell Berry's work. But his commitment to place is absolutely why you go to his, and there's a sort of poetry about it, which is wonderful.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'm reading James Rebank's English Pastoral at the moment.
Oh, what a wonderful book that is.
Beautiful. It's really challenging me quite personally, thinking about, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think he's very realistic, which I appreciate. He's not utopian. Yeah. He's sort of to say, okay, some of these modern technologies in the context of farming have been great, but there's also this consumerism that is just kind of like weeds and entangled itself around the whole. Yeah. It's quite ugly.
I found myself nodding along to all of that book. It was beautifully written as well. Oh my word, beautifully written. But that's the sort of I suppose here's a way of talking about my post-liberalism. After St. Paul's, and I left St. Paul's, I went up and I did a lecture in Gateshead at the Free Thinking Festival, and it was about the film The Magnificent Seven. I don't know if you know The Magnificent Seven. It's a cowboy film. Sorry?
Original.
Yeah, the original. I mean, I like the remake actually, but the original. But the story of it, well, even the Kurosawa one. But the idea that there's a sort of, you juxtapose the farmer and the gunfighter, and the gunfighter is a sort of drifts around, rootless, from bar to bar, place to place, uber cool, but doesn't actually defend any specific territory, and the farmer who is quite specifically rooted to place. And it seems to me that that is one of the great parables of political tension between a rooted existence and a rootless existence. And I remember when I used to teach philosophy in Oxford, I used to ask students to go and watch that film. And they'd go, why? And I said, well, I'll tell you for why. Is because I've heard 2 essays sitting in this room that have told me why Hegel is rubbish, why Heidegger is rubbish, why Kant is rubbish. And, they're all very clever, but the next week you'll take a different position. And the next week you'll take a different position. That's absolutely fine. But if you really want to impress me, defend some territory. Take some territory and defend it and inhabit it. And yes, it'll make you vulnerable because the bandits will come over the hill and try and get you. But the problem with the gunfighters is the gunfighters don't defend any territory. They just move on and move on and move on. And that for me was a very strong post-liberal moment, thinking about this contrast. And there's a great bit at the end of the film, at the end of Magnificent Seven, by one of the people who wanted to be a gunfighter, falls in love with one of the girls from the village.
El Paso soundtrack.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that? And he takes off his gun belt and he sits down and he starts sort of doing the corn and so forth. And it's sort of like a great political moment for me, that moment, which is, if you really want human flourishing is rooted, and families, and that they require a commitment to each other and a commitment to place. And the gunfighters and the unhappy lives of the gunfighters, the hollowness of the gunfighters, however cool they were, very cool, but however cool they were, that actually it was their inability to do the courageous thing that this youngest, Chico, I think it is, who takes off his gun belt, starts picking corn. And that's my post-liberal moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think, drawing in from what you said earlier as well, there's a sense of it, because these ideals can be quite abstract. I think they're beautiful and I'm with you on them. But I think that the parish church, the liturgy, the habits that are there, yes, in a Christian community, that's where the rubber hits the road, I think.
Exactly right.
And that's where those commitments are actually played out. And I mean, personally, sometimes that can be quite difficult, can't it? It's not, it's not easy to be committed, to be covenanted, both for ourselves and for mostly.
Because there's a lot of people who sit in this church that rub me up the wrong way. And, it's a real pain in the bum to be in community, it's all right to be in a chosen community, a community that which we use the word now is community is an aggregate of individuals who come together because they all like, old cars, or, they all have a specific interest in common or something. I don't mean that's not what I mean by community. It's not a coming together of specific interest groups. It is the people you live amongst. Geography is really important. And the parish system recognizes that. And there are people here who I've got very little in common with, not politically, not theologically, don't have the same background, but we are family through the church. And now that's wonderful. And, it's really great to be able to have a love for people and share a love with them that exceeds our opinions and our takes on the world. That for me is the glory of the parish system.
That's such a beautiful point, because I think with the problem that we seem to have got ourselves into with tribalism is that to sort of love one another, we must agree.
No, that's rubbish. Yeah,
Jonathan,
that's totally rubbish.
Jonathan, it's absolutely rubbish. Jonathan Haidt, I think, he's really opened my eyes when he talks about affections.
Yeah.
So, what's the term? Polarization, affective polarization, which is literally it's literally kind of a hatred towards the other person. Because we disagree, we can't be friends. Because we disagree, I can't marry you.
Crazy.
Disagree, I can't hang out with you. This kind of thing.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I really dislike that a lot.
Yeah.
It's a crazy notion. Look, there's people here. I mean, that's part of the reason why I try. I mean, I'm slightly wary about doing politics. Well, I don't do politics. I really try not to do politics in the pulpit. And, there are some things that are worthy of condemnation politically, but they are few and far between. And even though I'm not shy of expressing my political views in newspaper columns, I'm extremely shy of expressing my political views from the pulpit, because that's not, I mean, it's not always the case. There are some things, that you quite rightly have to condemn, but it's not I don't think I have ever mentioned Brexit from the pulpit.
Okay, interesting.
I don't think I ever, and we have people who are from all shades of political opinion here, and quite rightly so. And and sometimes I have to say to people, we've got some properly passionate Remainers here, of course, and I have to say to them, look, you just have to really forgive my appalling political views on this. I know you think they're appalling, and please forgive me, but they're not going to come in here. And that's not what this is about. And we have people here. We have Jeremy Corbyn supporters. We have Jordan Peterson supporters. In my congregation, and good. And this is not a place. This is not a place where we would rehearse all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you would say that, because I was going to ask you about that. I mean, I know you as someone who very openly wears your convictions on your sleeve, and I really admire you for that. But I wondered, this is sort of a question my wife had, because she's ordained in the Church of England, was, your attitude towards, holding those convictions, whether party political or just more generally, as an ordained clergy from the pulpit. But that's interesting to hear you say that. Yeah.
Well, I'm very lucky about a majority of my congregation here. So I'm very lucky in this regard, and perhaps I'm insulated a little bit. So I'd been here, I don't know, 6 months. And, after I came here was after there'd been, I was quite prominent in the papers because of my resignation from St. Paul's and all of that. And I'm writing regularly in The Guardian, and, and someone said, Father, come. We've seen you in the paper. And I was like, oh yeah. And they came to the back and they did a little cutting, and it was from the South London Advertiser. And they pinned it up at the back of church because their priest had been named in the South London Advertiser. Now, there's a lot of people who wouldn't have read The Guardian or BBC or any of that sort of stuff here. And they wouldn't have a clue what my political opinions were. So, and I was really quite pleased about that. I really was. So, it's perhaps I'm insulated a little, have been insulated a little bit from the tension that exists between a public profile and my priestly ministry. But I do, look, this is how I think of it. I am a priest, but as a priest, I'm the priestly bit comes out of my humanity, and so does the political bit. And though I would not abuse the privilege of the pulpit to promote my political views, and even when I think they're theological views, I'm very wary of doing it. I mean, I've expressed quite a lot of my political convictions to you in terms of my theology. I'm still extremely wary because I have a very strong sense of the importance of the worshipping community as not, being defined by its differences over things like that.
Mm.
So I think probably when I get behind, I think when I get in, when I am in church and the pulpit, I'm not the same figure.
It's very interesting. It's interesting to hear you say that. Yeah. I just had a couple more questions, Giles, on the sort of post-liberal front.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, I don't know if you saw these, but I enjoyed these videos from Respublica over the summer on the future of post-liberalism. And you haven't seen them?
No, I haven't seen them, no. No.
I was curious as to what you thought about yourself about the future of post-liberalism. You've got Blue Labour, right? You've got the sort of red Tory movement. I guess Respublica would be instance of that. You've got the SDP as well, the Social Democratic Party in the UK. I just wonder, do you think post-liberalism has a future electorally? It's clearly got a very active intellectual life, and I would say has a lot of resonates with people all across the UK.
Well, isn't it? It's very interesting. It's a very interesting question. So, as you rightly started, someone like Matt Goodwin would say that there is a sweet spot electorally about people who think left on economics and think more to the right on culture, as it were, more conservative on culture. That there is quite a big sweet spot there. So why is it that something like the SDP has not managed to break through politically when that's exactly where they exist? And the new declaration from the SDP was absolutely expressed that position. Why is it that Blue Labour, Ed Miliband had a little flirtation with Blue Labour, but it's still seen as a sort of Morris Glassman hobby horse. I love Morris Glassman. And the Red Tory thing, obviously, there was again a sort of bit of a flourish with that, with the Big Society and David Cameron, and you might have even have seen the previous Prime Minister as having a little bit of that about her, but it hasn't really taken off. Be hard to see it. And the answer is I don't really know why. Could it be the grip that the two-party system has on our political life, means that it's very difficult for sort of new thoughts to come through? Could it be that the future will be defined post-pandemic by, red wall? I mean, how does the red wall politics thing affect the Tory party? Does that draw the Tory party towards a more communitarian, redistributive vision? So hard to tell, because with Boris, who I take it is deep in his soul is an absolute liberal, Boris has been so taken up with issues of the pandemic that it's very hard to see other politics emerging at the moment. But the one thing I suppose you could say is that globalization is not having a good year, and that those of us who are suspicious of globalization probably have quite a lot to chew upon. Borders are being closed, and there's a sense of a need for a greater self-sufficiency rather than the sort of the globalized market.
For national efficiency, perhaps, or sort of local solidarity.
So I mean, local solidarity seems to be something that's being, we're all sort of being drawn back to the need for the local and the way in which we're sustained by the local. But Simeon, I don't know the answer to your question. I mean, I'm not a good pundit, and it is extraordinary to me that the post-liberal thing has not broken through as much as you might think it would, given the sort of Goodwin analysis. And when it does break through, it breaks, sometimes it comes through in very weird, perverted ways. I mean, in a way, Trump was a reaction to the sort of cry of the Rust Belt, but it gets allied to this sort of fierce, market-driven politics. And it's that's not a post-liberal moment.
It's culturally conservative, but then economically still liberal.
Yeah.
Not to mention the sort of abusive Christianity and so on.
Abusive, racist, downright bloody terrible. So it's not that. Though of course, those who are the enemies of a post-liberal moment would want to bring the two things together, I suppose, and think they're cut from the same cloth, but they're not. Look, as far as I'm concerned, post-liberalism, which, as I say, I don't like the term, is a answer to the question, who is my neighbour? That seems to be, and there is a problem with who is my neighbour. Your neighbour is there are different ways of fleeing from your neighbour. And one is to flee from your neighbour by being unconnected with those around us. I don't know who lives next door. I don't know who lives down the street. I spend my time flying around the world and I don't know anything about where it is that I live and who my actual neighbours are. That seems to me to be something that we've, and people who like move every 5 years or every 3 years, and that's the nature of capitalism since the Industrial Revolution has been to force labour to move all the time, and this has a profound effect on human well-being, it seems to me, and our sense of community.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting there, picking up one thread, that the pandemic could actually be, well, as you say, we're not pundits, but could have the potential to be a post-liberal moment. At the same time, though, there's a sense that this is something I struggle with. Is, I'm very like you. The community, the we, is really essential, but it seems as if that the we and the I are not living in a very healthy relationship just now.
No.
And particularly in the I sense, there's this sense that some of the rules that are being made don't have sunset clauses to them. Of course, when you say this kind of thing, you get labeled a libertarian, but I think liberty is still a core value that's something I'm anxious about.
Well, I've learned more about that during the pandemic. I've been too cheap in my condemnations of liberty in the past, because I've just, whenever I've heard freedom, and you talk about, positive and negative freedom before, whenever I've heard of whenever I heard the word freedom, I always think too much of, I can do what I bloody well like. That's what I hear. Let me do what I bloody well like. Make as much money as I like, sod everybody else. I'll do what I want because I want to do it. That's what I hear in freedom. But actually, freedom is a richer concept, and that's the thing. And we're learning that very much in the pandemic, aren't we? About that freedom has also to include our ability to gather and be with each other, and obviously freedom in terms of our ability to speak and to. So I've certainly been too quick in my condemnation of liberty in the past. But the truth is, look, I mean, my problem with liberty has always been that it's a cuckoo value, not in it of itself, is that it can be a cuckoo value and it's pushed out all the other values, So with Thatcherism, liberty, and freedom of the market, all that sort of stuff, just pushed out other values about solidarity and neighborliness and care for the vulnerable and all those sorts of things. So I ended up pushing back too strongly against liberty, but it is a part of a basket of values, and it has to be seen as such, and it has to take its place amongst others.
Indeed. That's very nicely put. Yeah, I think Matthew Crawford has been very influential in my thinking.
Yeah, of course. Brilliant.
Self-government. Yeah, I that was like my favorite book last year. Absolutely loved that.
What, The Why We Drive?
Yeah.
Oh, it's an amazing book. And I don't even drive. I've never driven a car in my life, pretty much. And I read Why We Drive I even bought it my brother, a Christmas book. It's an extraordinary book. And he's quite right about liberty and about the thrill and the risks. That idea of riding a motorbike and and the idea that you ride a motorbike, you're expressing your thrill at your own agency and freedom. But of course, you might fall off and hurt yourself and bang your head, and there are risks and all of that. And in the idea that we might, move towards the sort of imposed safety of the driverless car, that is a sort of state imposition which terrifies me. And when you get to that stage, then you probably find me with the libertarians, rather unfortunately. But Crawford's a brilliant thinker. I mean, an absolutely brilliant thinker.
Giles, just one final question. Why do you think Christians should take post-liberalism seriously? Why should Christians be talking about post-liberalism?
Well, listen, I mean, I don't really want them to, actually. I want them to talk about Christianity. That's not my focus, actually. I mean, I think probably post-liberals should talk about Christianity, but I think Christians have within our scriptures and tradition easily enough resources to deal with the political issues that face us. So they don't need to focus on something like post-liberalism. I don't really care about post-liberalism, really. I mean, that's probably what describes me, but I'm a fairly orthodox Catholic Christian, and that's what I'm really interested in. I'm interested in, if you want to know what post-liberalism means to me, it's what I do there with bread and wine, and the way in which that brings us together as community. Now, that is that sort of table fellowship, that sense of who we are. That's my post-liberalism. And there are times when I will make a contribution to post-liberal debate, but I'm not interested in post-liberalism per se. I'm interested in Christianity.
I think that's a good note in which to end, Giles.
My friend, thank you. Very nice to speak to you, man.
Thank you so much. It's great to speak with you as well.